Hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to give a quick update about Link and what some of our models here at the channel are making of its recent price action. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. Put a lot of updates about indicators and more over there. So with Link and with a lot of assets, I like to first look at our risk indicator, the UDPI, to kind of get an overall picture of the kind of risk-reward ratio from this model's estimation at the present moment. So this is the long-term version of the UDPI I'm showing you here, so it's reactive to moves that play out over months. And so this is the price history of Link color-coded to the UDPI level. And so higher levels of risk in the red, lower levels of risk down here in the green. And you'll notice that we just were at an extremely low level of risk, actually one of the lowest levels of risk that Link has ever recorded. And we can see this if we just look at the raw price levels. Really, the last time that Link was down in these kind of risk levels was back in the 2018 bear market when Link kind of put in its all-time lows. And then since then, it was really just kind of in a big bull market, really going up to the all-time high in early 2021. And then, more or less, Link has actually arguably just been in a big downtrend ever since. Not being able to set in a new all-time high in the fall of 21, like a lot of other crypto assets, and really taking a beating in the months since. And so on the risk level, we can see that with this kind of low here, at least the local bottom so far, we set in that extremely low level of risk, and we've actually been charting a course back to the upside. So Link has been realizing some upside here, right? Although it has then sold off in more recent days. So the way that I look at this is that we're currently sitting, just right around -2 on the long-term UDPI for Link. And so what that means, kind of in an absolute sense, is that there is more realistic upside potential on the long-term UDPI's perspective than downside potential. But the downside has grown, right? Relative to when we were back here, the model has, basically said that it thinks that there's, reasonable downside potential here that we have to be careful about. And so that's kind of one of the things where when you're getting into these accumulation zones, kind of getting into these ranges, the model is overall disposed to the bullish side, thinking that there's more room for it to move up than down from here. But if a breakdown did happen from this range, the model now thinks that there is plausible downside potential that could be realized. New lows could be possible. So my base case, kind of looking at Link, is that I think that Link is largely going to be kind of dependent on what the rest of the crypto market does. I think it's unlikely that Link goes in some crazy rally or goes on a crazy dump without the rest of the market doing something similar. I think the rest of the market would have to start going bullish or going bearish for Link to kind of decisively break out in one direction or the other. Could be wrong, but that's my base case. I think Link is going to be largely correlated with what the rest of the market does. And so what that means is that kind of my base case is that Link is probably just going to stay range bound. We've kind of set this range at this upper level of resistance here and then this lower level of support down here. It seems very reasonable to me that Link just kind of plays around in this level for a while until either Link itself gets a bullish impulse to the upside. Things like fundamental developments like implementation of staking, for example, could be something that provides a bullish impulse. I think it's unlikely that Link is just going to dump on its own. There had to be some kind of black swan specific to Link to make it dump on its own. And I just think more or less it putting in a range seems reasonable. And so what I expect then on the long-term UDPI might be something like the behavior we saw back here, kind of towards the end of the 2018 drawdown, going into this kind of accumulation zone into 2019 before we started moving back to the upside. I think something like this is very reasonable to happen. And in fact, we just put in a move a little bit above -2 like we did there. And now we're coming back down. I don't know if we have to come all the way back down into these deep negatives, but kind of playing in kind of a lower level of range where overall the model remains bullish on Link, but that there is, downside potential that can be realized, throughout that range. That's kind of what I'm thinking might be the most likely scenario to play out from here. And so that would be in some ways bullish, right? Because if it just means we're going into a new accumulation zone like down here that ultimately leads into a move to the upside, people don't like waiting. People like to see price ripping immediately. But in some ways, it just gives people who are interested in acquiring Link more time if that's what ends up playing out. Of course, not financial advice. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen. It's possible Link could go and set new lows. But I think for people who are long-term bullish on Link, who think it has fundamental value, kind of its importance to the Web3 space being kind of the dominant oracle, people who think it will eventually put in a new all-time high, finding one of those accumulation zones is probably really what people are looking for if they're long-term bullish, because that gives them a lot of time, maybe DCA into the asset, build up a position to then ride it into that next leg up when the bull market eventually returns. So even if Link's unable to kind of go ripping off on its own to the upside, in some ways, who cares? If it has to wait for the rest of the crypto market to rally, then great. Then it's going to rally and people will be happy if they had accumulated. But again, all that comes with the caveat that downside is plausible, and so we always have to take that into consideration. So this model thinks that overall the risk reward is favorable for Link, but you always have to keep in mind that as with any asset, downside volatility is certainly not impossible. And so if we flip over to the short-term UDPI level here, we see a similar story playing out to the long-term, where because the short-term UDPI is more reactive to kind of shorter-term moves, we had chewed up more of our short-term upside potential in this move coming up here, getting kind of rejected off a little bit above zero, which is a level that has played as resistance in the past for Link. And now we're moving back down. So we're starting to accrue more short-term upside potential, but again, there is still this downside short-term potential that could be realized as well. And so I think kind of my base case again is if we remain range bound, we'll probably see similar behavior where we find some support down at these lower levels of the short-term UDPI and then move up and get rejected at similar levels until the market really picks a decisive direction. So that's kind of my assessment of what the risk models are the risk data, kind of what we're looking at here. I want to turn over to a different indicator here next, though, the momentum bias indicator, or MBI, to give us a picture of what might be going on in the more macro or cyclical sense for Link. What part of the market cycle is it in? So if you're not familiar with this asset, it quantifies momentum if you're not familiar with this indicator, it quantifies momentum in a given asset. So in this case with Link, if you're above zero, if you're in the green, that's bullish. That means that you have this positive momentum bias, that any moves to the downside are quickly bought up and shot back up. Hence the term bias, that kind of the overall momentum is biased to the upside and really pulls price up. Whereas if you're in this negative momentum bias regime in the red down here, that tends to be bear market behavior, kind of pulling price down along with it. Now, one of the things that's notable when you're looking at the MBI for Link is that it had been in this downtrend really ever since the actually the high that we had put in back in the summer of 2020, when Link kind of really set itself aside from the rest of the market and went crazy, to a much greater degree than most other crypto assets did at that time. And really, even the all-time high, or even before the all-time high, we weren't able to put in as high of a momentum reading as before. So we've been kind of just in this downtrend on the MBI kind of ever since. And especially down here, we've been in this very bearish behavior. We're just, every time we poked our head above zero, we just get rejected to the downside. With this move here, though, interestingly, we have broken that downtrend on the MBI, which might be suggestive of a change in behavior. So maybe possibly that might suggest that this downtrend we've been in ever since the all-time high, maybe there's some indication of a change in behavior that we're seeing here. And so one of the things that I've talked about before, and I think is important to watch, will be important to watch here, is how price reacts in this kind of time. Because what we don't want to see is this to turn into something like this that we've seen before, where we just get rejected after kind of poking our head above zero and go in and set a new low. That would obviously be a very, very bearish outcome. What instead we'd like to see is this kind of transition into an oscillation around zero type of behavior. I've talked about this before with other assets. So when you see this kind of equal oscillation around zero, that tends to be kind of the accumulation zones that precede big moves to the upside. So what I'll be watching for is how price reacts here. If we can start charting a course back to the upside before too long and start seeing the MBI start putting in that kind of behavior, kind of oscillating around zero, that might mean that it is kind of a sign of this being an accumulation zone, a sign of this entering into this pre-stage, this transitionary period from a bear market into a possible bull market coming out of here. And especially if we see assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum start to put in that kind of behavior as well, kind of showing signs of an accumulation zone, that might then kind of be more evidence that this could be possibly a bottom. Not going to call it a bottom, I don't know. We could still have further downside to come here. But it could be a sign that this really is an accumulation zone range we're putting in before maybe a move back to the upside is possible. So again, of course, not financial advice. I don't have a crystal ball, don't know exactly what's going to happen. But that's what I'm going to be watching. If we start putting this oscillation around zero, that would make me a lot more bullish on link and make me think that this could very plausibly be the bottom leading into an accumulation zone into maybe possibly a big move to the upside. And then, especially if the rest of the crypto market gets more bullish, that could just be, or if there are kind of specific catalysts to link that kick in, that could be kind of a kick in the pants to see a nice move to the upside. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates about indicators and more over there.